Hey friends, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to create a guessing game whereby when we refresh the browser, the page says, prompts the user to enter a number between 1 and 3. We're trying to guess whatever number the computer has guessed. So if I guess 2, for example, I got it wrong. I guessed too low. If I refresh again, let's do number 3. Awesome, I won. Okay, so basically we're guessing a number between 1 and 3, and we're trying to see if basically we're guessing the right number. Okay, so believe it or not, we actually know how to do this with all the code we've learned so far. So what we want to do is, first of all, we want to prompt the user to enter a number. We know how to do that. We've seen window.prompt before. Inside of parentheses, we'll just have a message like please enter a number or please guess a number between 1 and 3. We'll store that in a variable called userGuess. What we can do is we'll take that input that will be of type string and just convert that to a number. We've seen that before. Then we'll just log out of the console, the human or the user guess, whatever. Then what we want to do is we want to get the computer to have a guess, and we can just use mat.random for the computer to have a guess. So we'll multiply that by 3 and floor and add 1. So we've seen this before. We'll store that in a variable, and then what we'll do is we'll do a comparison to check to see, if the user guessed the same number as the computer, in which case they won. Otherwise, did they guess too low, did they guess too high, etc. Okay, so that's what we have to look forward to in this tutorial. So really what we're doing is we're starting to bring together everything we've learned so far in this course, because, I definitely have to teach you all the syntax, like if statements, prompts, all of that. But at some point we have to start bringing it all together so you can see the logic of how you'd actually start building some games and some cool apps down the line. Okay, awesome. So this is the code I actually wrote. So we'll just delete all of that and start from scratch. Okay, so we're going to be using everything we've learned so far, like I say, comments, using the console, getting a prompt, etc. So I'll start talking and we'll start coding. Okay, so basically we're creating a guessing game in JavaScript. I don't know why I went for all caps there. I'm not shouting at you. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, well, let me write out the instructions here. Okay, we want to do a couple of things, right? Number one, we want to prompt, if I can spell correctly, I was out for a walk in the cold, so I hope I can type. So prompt the user to guess a number between 1 and 3. Okay, that's the first thing we need to do. Obviously, we need to store that in a variable and convert to a number. Okay, basically, you need to generate a computer guess using mat.random. We've seen that before. And then what you want to do is you want to essentially use an else if statement and the comparison operators that we've seen. So comparison operators are, like strict equality, greater than, less than, that kind of thing, to do a comparison. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is basically get the human guess or the user's guess. So we'll say human guess. So how do we do that? Well, we want to prompt the user to enter a number between 1 and 3 and then store that in a variable. So I'm going to say let user guess, note the use there of camel case, and that's going to be equal to window.prompt. Okay, so we'll say guess a number between 1 and 3 and add a few exclamation marks there to create a sense of urgency. Okay, so that's going to prompt the user to enter a number between 1 and 3, right? But then what we want to do is we want to take that guess and convert it to type number and then store it in a variable. So what we can do is we can say user guess again. So we're going to override the value of user guess up here, which should be of type string, and convert this here. So basically what we're doing is we're getting the user to enter a number between 1 and 3. Assume I press the number 2 on my keyboard. We store it here, but it's going to be of type string, right? So what we want to do is just pass that in to number, the inbuilt power in JavaScript, and convert it to a type number, and then store it inside of user guess. Don't worry, I'll talk through this code again if this is a bit confusing. And remember, we don't need to say let user guess like that. Okay, we've already essentially initialized and assigned a value to the variable originally. So all we're doing here is just overriding or assigning a new value. You don't need to redeclare a variable you've already declared. Okay, awesome. Now what we can do is just log that out to the console. So we can say, you guessed number. Then what we'll do is we'll just input user guess. Okay. So I hope all that makes sense. Basically, all we're doing is we're just prompting the user to guess a number between 1 and 3. We're storing it inside a variable called user guess. Then what we're doing is we're taking that user guess, whether it's 1, 2, 3, the string, converting it to type number, and then we have it of type number. Okay. And the reason is we want that to be of type number. When we generate a random number for the computer, we want to be able to compare the same data type. We want to ensure we're getting the same data type and values just for consistency. Okay, so now we need to get the computer guess. So computer guess, how do we do that? Well, we want to store this in a variable, right? So we'll say let computer guess be equal to number 1, 2, or 3. So we don't want to hard code this, okay? We want to use math.random. So we've seen math.random before. So if I say math.random, okay, that's going to generate a random number, more or less between 0 and 1, okay? But what we want to do is we want to multiply that by 3, okay? So that could give us a value anywhere between 0 right up to like 2.999, etc., okay? So what we want to do is we actually want to floor that, so wrap all of this inside of math.floor. So basically, whatever is after the decimal place, we're getting rid of, okay? So for example, if we generate a random number of 1.71, we'd get the number 1. If we got a number of like 2.55, we'd get the number 2. If we got 0.12, we'd get 0, okay? So by using math.floor, what we're doing now is we're ensuring we're getting a number 0, 1, or 2. So what we want to do then is take all of this and just add the number 1 to the end of it. Okay, so just like that. And now instead of getting 0, 1, 2, we're getting 1, 2, or 3. Okay, awesome. And then what we can do is just log that out to the console. So we can say console.log, the computer guessed, comma separate, and then just whatever the computer guessed, okay? Awesome. Okay, so now the user has a guess and the computer has a guess, and we're logging them out to the console, okay? But we need to do our comparison. So how do we do that? Well, we can use our else if knowledge that we've learned before. So there's a few different ways we could do this. Yeah, because like it's between 1, 2, and 3, we could basically say, okay, if the human guesses above the computer, they guess too high. If they went below, they guess too low. Because it's only 3 numbers, else then, basically they probably won. But to just be a bit more accurate, we're just going to test that the human guess was the same as the computer guess. I'm going to start saying user guess. I think human guess is a bit weird. Makes me sound like I'm an android. I'm actually not. I'm a real person with feelings and preferences. Okay, so I like coffee. Sorry, just grabbing some water. Okay, so basically, we want to check that the user guess is strictly equal to the computer guess. Now remember, I need to use 3 equal signs here for strict equality, okay? So now we're checking to see that the user guess is the same as the computer guess, okay? And if that's the case, we want to log out to the console, congrats, you won. We'll do it in capital letters, congratulations, you won. We want to get the endorphins running in their brain, else if, okay, now, if the user guess was greater than the computer guess, okay, basically we know they guessed too high, didn't they? So say console.log. I'm just going to copy this, okay, an empty string there in console.log. We'll say, oops, you guessed too high. Okay, so basically the user guess was greater than the computer guess. Else if the user guess is less than the computer guess, basically the user guessed too low. So we'll console.log, oops, you guessed too low. I just realized I have bad grammar here. That should be you guessed too high. And then else, well, if the user hasn't won, but they haven't guessed too high or too low with three numbers, I don't know what's going on. So we just console.log system error. We'll do it in capitals to be dramatic. System error. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I believe this should work. Let me just review it and we'll talk through it together. So basically what we're doing is we're prompting out to the user or the window, guess a number between 1 and 3. So a user can press 1, 2, or 3. Then what we're doing is we're storing it in the variable user guess. And remember, when we declare a variable for the first time, you want to use the let keyword, okay? Unless it's a constant variable, which we spoke about previously. For example, a date of birth, where you don't want to override the value of a variable later on. Of course, we do, because what we want to do then is we want to take the user guess and just convert it to a number data type. And then we're just logging out to the console, you guessed number, and then whatever they guessed, right? Then down here we get the computer guess. So we generate a number, a random number, using mat.random. So that gets us a number between like 0 and 0.999. Then we multiply it by 3, so we're getting a number anywhere between like 0 and almost 3. Then what we're doing is we're using mat.floor to disregard everything after the decimal place. So we're going to get like, 1, 2, or 1, 0, 1, or 2. And then we just add 1 to it. So we're getting a number between 1 and 3. So 1, 2, or 3. Then we just log that out of the console using console.log. And then we just say the computer guessed, where's my grammar today? Computer guess, okay. And then down here is where we're doing our comparison. So this is where we're doing our check. So checking who won, essentially, okay. So basically, if the user guess was the same as the computer guess, maybe we guessed 3 and the computer guessed 3, then we won. We guessed the computer's number. So congrats, we win. Else, if our guess was greater than the computer guess, we guessed too high, we didn't correctly guess the computer's number. Else, if our guess is less than the computer guess, we guessed too low. Otherwise, system error. Okay, so let's go have a look. Okay, guess a number between 1 and 3. Let's say the number 1. Oh, I guessed too low. Okay, if I refresh, guess a number between 1 and 3. Let's go for 3. Oops, I guessed too high. Let's try again. Go for number 2. Guess too high. I'm going to keep guessing the number 3. Hopefully I win eventually. Oh my god, I won. You guessed 3. Woohoo! Okay, USA. Alright guys, so that is how we can create a guessing game in JavaScript. I really hope you enjoyed that tutorial. For the first time, we've really started to bring together everything we've learned. So we have our comments here. We're basically creating variables. We're storing a user guess into a variable and converting it to type number. We've seen mat.random before, how we can generate random numbers, and there we're doing a check to see who won the game. Later on in the course, we're going to basically have a complete dice roll game with actual dice on the screen. So that's way later on in this course, but I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. We're finally starting to bring together everything that we've learned, but we've a lot more to do. So for example, I have to refresh the page, to be able to guess. So if you don't want the users to have to refresh the page, which is kind of annoying, we're going to have to start talking about loops and that kind of thing. So that's it for that tutorial. I'll see you in the next one, and we will continue our JavaScript journey together. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to talk to you about the logical operators in JavaScript. So we are now introducing the logical operators. I hope you're excited. The logical operators are one of my favorite topics in JavaScript, and they're absolutely fantastic if you want to test for multiple conditions. Okay, so for example, so far in this course, we've essentially been learning about the if statement. If some condition is true, run some code. Otherwise maybe run another piece of code. So for example, maybe you're testing if the bank balance is above $500. You might say let bank balance be equal to, I don't know, someone has 12,000 for some reason, and you're testing if the bank balance is greater than or equal to 500. You might say, okay, we will give you credit. Okay, we'll say you can get a loan. Okay, awesome. But what if you wanted to test multiple conditions? So maybe someone, to get a loan from our bank, not only do they need to have a bank balance of greater than or equal to 500, but they had to be currently employed. They had to have a job. How would you do that based on what we've learned so far? Well, this is where we're going to bring in the logical AND operator. So the logical AND operator allows us to test that multiple conditions are true. And all you need to do is use the AND symbol, okay? But we're not going to type out AND. It's represented by a double ampersand, okay? So for example, maybe this person is employed. So we might say, you could say like has job or is employed. We're a bit professional, so we'll say is employed, okay? And we're going to set that to the Boolean value of true. So now what we could do down here is we could test, okay, is their bank balance greater than 100 and are they employed? So is employed strictly equal to true, okay? So guys, this is the AND operator in JavaScript where we can test for multiple conditions. So this is a bit of a tough example, is employed and bank balance. So let's just take a step back and make it more simple. Do you remember Jessica had her birthday party and it was her night out, okay? Well, maybe we want to test that, Jessica's friends are over a certain age and that they've paid, okay? So Jessica's friend Rachel comes up, right? So we want to test that Rachel has paid the cover charge to get into the nightclub and that, she's over 21 years of age. So we'll say that Rachel is 29, right? So Rachel is 29. So we say let age equal 29. And then we want to have some sort of has paid variable. So we could say let, has paid be assigned a value of true, okay? Maybe actually she hasn't paid, but Jessica has paid the cover charge for everyone. So really it is true, right? They have paid. So how would we check this? Well, what we can do is we can have our if statement. And remember, both conditions have to be true for us to let them into the club. So we can say you can enter, otherwise, else, we'll just say console.log, you cannot enter tonight, or something like that, okay? Awesome. All right, so now we have to test our conditions. So the first thing we're testing is age greater than or equal to 21, okay, and double ampersand. So ampersand is above the number 7 on the keyboard. I hold down shift and press 7, that's how I get it. And has paid is strictly equal to true, okay? So what do you think is going to happen? Whoops, sorry, bit of a space there. Okay, so we're checking that age is greater than or equal to 21, okay? So that's the greater than or equal to that we're using there. And double ampersand, we're checking that has paid, the Boolean variable, is strictly equal to true, okay? So anything that's true, that would be considered truity in JavaScript, okay? So what do you think is going to happen? Well, both conditions have been met, right? Rachel, Jessica's friend, is above 29, so age greater than or equal to 21 evaluates to true, and has paid, this Boolean variable, is equal to true. So both conditions have to be true for us to enter this part of the if statement, okay? So that's the key thing about and. Both conditions have to be true. If one condition is not true or is false, then this entire thing here, this entire condition evaluates to false, right? But in this case, it's true, so we let them in. So we have you can enter. Okay, awesome, right? Now, as I say, all of that has to evaluate to true. For housekeeping purposes, I actually like to wrap both conditions I'm testing inside of parentheses. I just think it makes it easier to read. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're just wrapping this condition here, this test, inside of parentheses, and then we have this second test here. So the person's over 21, are they, and have they paid? Okay. Now, what happens if one of these conditions evaluated to false? So maybe they were actually only 19. Okay, well, as I say, if one condition evaluates to false, then the entire statement, this entire condition, will evaluate to false. So now we're doing our check. Is age greater than or equal to 21? No, it's not. Okay, so that check is false. And has paid. Is has paid true? Well, has paid is true, but the age is not greater than or equal to 21. Because we haven't met both conditions, this entire statement here evaluates to false. So we don't enter this code block, okay? So this whole expression here is considered falsy. We don't enter this code block of the if statement. We come down here to else and we log out, you cannot enter tonight, because while they've paid, they're not over 21, okay? So you see there, you cannot enter tonight. If hypothetically a few years went by and they were 24 years of age, so now they are technically able to come in based on the age check, but maybe has paid is false, they're trying to pull a fast one on us, we're not letting them in, okay? Key thing about the and statement is both conditions have to be true for someone to be admitted to our nightclub, okay? If both conditions are false, so maybe the next person's 20 years of age and they haven't paid, well, you know, that's false. They're not greater than or equal to 21, and they haven't paid, so they're definitely not getting in, okay? So guys, that is the and statement in JavaScript. A real world example of this is, imagine a streaming service like, you know, Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever the case may be. Let's say me and you are making our own streaming service with some sort of fun content. I don't know, walking tours of Berlin or something like that, right? Maybe we want to check to see that a user has signed up to our platform, okay, but that they're also logged in, right? So we could test that as well. So we could say let has signed up, or you could say is subscribed, is a user, is subscribed is equal to true. And then let has logged in, or we could say is logged in is also equal to true. So we could say if both these conditions are true, so someone has basically signed up to our streaming service and has paid, looks like they have, and they're also logged in. So logged in, yes. Then we want to show them the walking tour video of Berlin. I was actually in Berlin in 2015, nice place, haven't been back since. So what we could do is we could do our check. We could say is subscribed, so have they signed up to our platform? Okay, we want to check to see if that is equal to true, and we want to see if they've logged in, okay? So if both things are true, we will basically say here are the walking tour videos of Berlin. Maybe we'll say like enjoy or something like that, right? Else we might say, you know, just please sign up, okay? Else console.log, please sign up and log in to view the videos. Okay, awesome. So is logged in is strictly equal to true. So what are we doing here? Well, we've created two variables. Is subscribed is a Boolean value assigned a value of true, and is logged in is a variable assigned, it's a Boolean variable also assigned a value of true, okay? So what we can do is we can just wrap these things here, our two conditions we're testing for, inside of parentheses just for readability, okay? So what do you think is going to happen? Well, is subscribed has a value of Boolean true. We're testing that it is strictly equal to true with three equal signs, and double ampersand, we're testing is logged in is strictly equal to true. So what do you think is going to happen? We're going to let them view the videos of Berlin, aren't we? Because both conditions are true. They've paid, they've signed up, and they've logged in. So here you are, enjoy the walking tour videos of Berlin. Now, when you are testing that a Boolean variable is equal to true, okay, you don't actually have to use the triple equal signs and then assign it the value, or test to see if it's equal to true there. Any variable that has a Boolean value of true is considered truty in JavaScript, okay? So what you can do is you can actually delete that, delete strictly equal to true for both variables, and this is still going to work, okay? So testing is subscribed and is logged in, that will still work for us, okay? To prove this to you, if I refresh, we still get to see the videos, okay? So basically, when you're testing for a Boolean variable, you know, if its value is true, you don't need to test, you know, the variable name strictly equal to true. You just can put in the variable name, and that is essentially the same thing, okay? So basically, if I say is subscribed, i.e. the variable name, inside of an if statement, basically that's the same thing as testing for, you know, is subscribed strictly equal to true, okay? Awesome. And then because it's just two variables, the names. You don't really have to have them wrapped in parentheses there if you don't want to. We can just shorten that code up. So now we're just very quickly just saying, is the user subscribed in? And is the user subscribed? And are they essentially logged in? And in case you're wondering with and the double ampersand, the logical and here, so this is the logical and where both conditions have to be true. You're probably wondering, can you test for multiple conditions? And have another ampersand and test for something else? You absolutely can. So if you wanted, you could do that. So an example of that might be, remember in our nightclub example, maybe you want to test that number 1, you're over 21. Number 2, you've paid, and number 3, you're sober. So that's an example of where you could test for multiple conditions. But we'll leave it there for now. So remember, the key takeaway for this tutorial is we've been introduced now to logical and. The logical and basically means that whether you're testing for 2 conditions or multiple conditions, they all have to be true for the expression to evaluate to true, okay? And remember, the logical and is with 2 ampersands. Okay, awesome. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, friends, welcome back. In the last tutorial, we saw logical and. We're basically doing a test to see if basically multiple conditions are all true. So basically, if we're doing a test for one condition and another, both or all conditions must be true for the entire thing to evaluate to be true. So that was logical and in the last tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to cover the logical or, where one condition must be true or another condition for the entire thing to evaluate to true. So the logical or is represented by 2 little pipes. So how I get them is I press shift on my keyboard and I press the button to the left of the letter Z on the keyboard. Z or Z, depending on your pronunciation. So like Z for zebra, okay? Awesome. So where would you do this? Well, one example would be maybe you're looking to end a game and you want to end the game if the user has won, if that Boolean value turns out to be true, or basically the user has run out of guesses. So you might have a Boolean variable like no more guesses or something. So basically, if one of those things happen, the game ends. Another example might be, you're looking to hire somebody and you want to make sure they have relevant experience or the relevant qualification, okay? You're kind of busy right now, so they don't need the qualification and the experience. One or the other is good, and if they have a positive attitude, you feel you can, you can train them up, right? So how do we test for that? Well, let's create a variable called has experience, okay? So do they have experience in our fields? We're actually interviewing a young candidate and they've no relevant experience. So that's false, okay? So that's no good. But what we're saying to them is, hey, listen, you don't really have any experience, but we're going to give you a test. And if you can score 60 or higher in the test, we're going to give you the job, right? So basically, they do the test, and they're very enthusiastic, and like, oh my God, like, they get like 75, so that's really good. So now let's do a test to see if we're going to hire them or not. Well, what we do is we have our if condition. So we want to say we want to hire them if they have a score that is greater than or equal to 60, or they have relevant experience. Okay, so or has experience, that variable is strictly equal to true. Okay, remember, you could also as well just delete all of this. So has experience, just passing that variable in there, that's basically the same thing as testing. For has experience is strictly equal to true. I'll just use this syntax for now, but you'll get more comfortable with the more shorthand notation as we go through the course and write more code together. So what we want to do is, if they have a score greater than or equal to 60, or they have relevant experience, we want to give them the job. So we will say console.log, congrats, you are hired, okay? We're assuming we're running a business in the middle of a booming economy where sessions are no fun. Alternatively, we say, sorry, you are not hired. You are not hired today. we'll do the whole like, please try again another time. You know, we don't want to be, what's the word? Uh, we want people to feel like they can come back and apply again. We don't want them to be disheartened. Okay, so what's going to happen if I save and refresh in the browser? Well, let's have a look. Has experience the young candidate, has no experience, so that Boolean value is false. But they got a score in the test greater than or equal to 60. 75 is greater than or equal to 60. So now we do our test, right? Now remember, with the logical OR, only one condition has to evaluate to true for the entire statement to evaluate to true. Okay, so in the last tutorial with logical AND, both conditions would have to be true for us to hire the candidate. So if, for example, I was to say the logical AND, basically in a strict environment, maybe there's a recession now, we're not hiring unless you have the relevant experience and you have a good score, because you know when recessions happen, employers have more power. Basically, in that situation, we're not going to hire the candidate. Sorry, you were not hired today. So while they got a good score, they didn't have relevant experience. But then the economy grows again. Yay. And, you know, we need to be a bit less picky about who we hire, even though we have a great company. So now we're saying, okay, you know what? This young guy doesn't have experience, but he got a good score. So while has experience is going to be false, right? So has experience, that Boolean value false there, that's not equal to true, right? So false is not equal to true. That side of the expression evaluates to false. However, because they got a score greater than or equal to 60, that evaluates to true. And remember, with the logical OR, if one of the conditions is true, the entire statement evaluates to true. So what happens? We now hire the candidate. So let's have a look and see. And refresh. And we get congrats, you're hired. Awesome. Okay. We can do another test as well with the logical OR, another example just for practice. Maybe we, like I say, we want to end the game if the user wins or basically has no guesses left, right? So we could say let user wins. We'll initially set this to be false. Maybe the user hasn't won the game yet. And we'll say let out of guesses be assigned a value of false, right? So basically if the user wins, if that becomes true, the game is over. Or if the user is out of guesses, the game is over. So then we could say something like, some condition here. We could say if user wins is strictly equal to true, or, and remember, to use the OR operator, it's a double pipe. Press shift and hold down on the button to the left of the letter Z, Z for zebra, or Z, depending on your pronunciation. So if the user wins, we want to end the game, or if they run out of guesses, right? So obviously, if you win, the game is over, but you could lose and the game still ends if you run out of guesses, right, hypothetically, okay? So user wins, we're testing if it's true, or out of guesses, we're testing if it's true, okay? So what we'll do is we'll just console.log, game over, okay? Otherwise, the game keeps going. So we'll just say console.log, game in session or something. Like game is currently being played, okay? So what do you think is going to happen here? Well, let's have a look. For us to enter the code block here for the if statement, okay, this has to evaluate to true, okay? So we need one or more conditions to be true. So remember, this, with logical OR, only one condition needs to be true for the entire thing to evaluate to true, okay? Now, we're testing if the user wins is equal to true. Right now, user wins is equal to false. False is not equal to true. That evaluates to false, okay? Is the user out of guesses yet? No, they're not out of guesses yet. So out of guesses, we're testing is that strictly equal to true? False is not equal to true. So that evaluates to false. So we don't log out game over. Instead, we come into the else block and we see game is currently being played. So to prove that to you, if I save and refresh, we get game is currently being played. Okay, awesome. But good news story, we want the user to get the right guess and they win. So now that has become true. User wins is now true. What happens? Well, when we do our test inside of the if statement, user wins is now true. True is strictly equal to true. So the entire thing evaluates to true, even though out of guesses has a Boolean value of false. And we know false is not equal to true. So even though this side of the expression evaluates to false, because this side evaluates to true, the entire thing evaluates to true, so therefore we do enter the code block for the if statement in between that curly brace there and that curly brace there. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the logical OR in JavaScript, where we're testing for at least one condition to be true. So we're testing for at least one condition, but not necessarily all, to be true. All right, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, welcome back. In this tutorial, I want to introduce you to a concept in JavaScript known as logical not, okay, or the logical not operator. Okay, so what the logical not operator is, it essentially is you take some sort of expression, okay, and then you can negate it with the exclamation mark. The exclamation mark can be found by pressing Shift and pressing the number 1 on your keyboard, okay? So what the logical not operator does, apologies, let's go back to writing a comment, okay? So the logical not operator, okay, negates a value. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by it negates a value? Well, what it does is it essentially changes a false value to true, okay, or it can change a true value to false, okay? Right, so let's do a couple of examples. Well, if I go to the console, if I say console.log and I just log out the Boolean value of true, semicolon, what we're going to see in the console is a Boolean true, okay? To prove that to you, if I just come down to Google Chrome and refresh, we see we get true the Boolean value. How the logical not operator works is you can essentially negate a value by just putting the exclamation mark on front of it. So now this is going to be not true, okay? So what is not true? Well, not true will have a value of false, so therefore we should see the Boolean value of false logged out of the console. And just to prove that to you, we now get false. Okay, awesome. Another example of this is if I log out of the console, false, okay, we're going to see the Boolean value of false. Okay, I hope you believe me, but let's just have a look and refresh. So we get false again, okay? However, what I can do is I can actually negate false by using the exclamation mark or the logical not operator. So now, when we have not false, well, not false will evaluate to true. So therefore, we should now see the Boolean true logged out to the console. And we do, we have true. Okay, awesome. So you don't just have to negate a hard-coded Boolean value such as true or false. You can also do it on variables. So maybe, for example, we have a user and they're playing a game and you might have like game over. So we could say let game over be equal to false because maybe the user has started the game, okay? So basically, if we were to log out to the console the value of game over, the variable, it would have a Boolean value of false. Just to prove that to you, if I console.log out will say game over value, and then just log out to the console that variable. Let's have a look. What do you think the value is going to be? Well, it's going to be false, right? It's going to be false. So let's just see here. So we get game over value is false, right? But let's say hypothetically the user runs out of guesses and therefore the game is over. Well, what we could do is we could change the value of the game over variable, assign it the value of itself, negate it, okay? So game over. Okay, so what am I doing here? Well, what I'm doing is using the logical not operator, I'm negating the value of false, okay? So now that's going to be true, okay? So remember, not game over. Game over has a Boolean value of false. By negating it, I'm changing the game over value to be true, okay? And then what I'm doing is I'm assigning it to the game over variable, okay? So this is us using the logical not operator to actually change the value of a variable. And now if I log out to the console, new value of game over variable when the game is over, what's that going to be? Well, let's log it out to the console and have a look. What is the new value of the game over variable? Well, it's now going to be changed to true because the game is now over, okay? So guys, that is the logical not operator in JavaScript. I know it's a bit confusing to get your head around, so we'll do another example in the next tutorial. But the key takeaway from this tutorial is that the logical not is another operator in JavaScript, okay? So basically what you do is you take whatever expression you have and just put an exclamation mark at the front of it, okay? So like not true, not false, etc. So remember, when you negate a value, what's going to happen? Well, if you were to negate true, if you were to say not true, that would be false. And if you were to say not false, that would be true. Very basic way of thinking about it is it just flips a Boolean value to the other value. So from true to false or from false to true. We'll do an example in the next tutorial, so I'll see you then. Okay, in this tutorial, I just want to do another example of us using the logical not, just so we can conceptualize it, and then we'll start looking at other concepts in JavaScript, such as the switch statement and loops. So we're getting to some interesting content now. So what I want to do is I want to create a fictional situation where essentially a user is logged up to our platform, and our boss wants us to alert out, awesome videos if they are signed up to the platform. It's a streaming service like Netflix or Paramount or whatever, okay? So we could say let is member, or you could do is signed up. Let's assign that the Boolean value of true. So if someone is signed up, we want to alert out something. Oh, we know how to do that. All we need to do is use an if statement. So remember, with the if statement, we have the if keyword, parentheses, some condition we're going to check for, and then curly braces, our code block. So what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if is member is strictly equal to true, okay? And if that is the case, what we want to do is we want to alert out awesome videos, okay? Semicolon to end the statement. So now what's going to happen is we have this variable is member. It has been assigned the Boolean value of true. Then we're checking to see if is member is strictly equal to true. Let's just alert out awesome videos. So let's just save and refresh, and we get awesome videos. Okay, great. Now, you don't need to use the triple equal signs equal to true. You can just delete all of that and use shorthand notation. So we're just checking to see if is member is truety. So is member is true. So we're checking if is member. So if true, run the code. Okay, so that will still evaluate the true because it is member has the Boolean value of true. So it still works. Okay, great. Now, what if our boss says instead of alerting out awesome videos if they're signed up, they want to alert out, sign up now if they're not a member, okay? Sign up now. So how would we basically test for that if they were not signed up, okay? So how would we execute this code here? Well, what's going to happen now is, right, we've created a variable called isMember. We've assigned it the Boolean value of false. So is this going to run? Well, if isMember, we're checking to see if this is truety, if it's true. It's currently false. So if that condition evaluates to false, which it does, we don't enter the curly braces and execute all of the code or the statements inside of that code block. So now what's going to happen is, if I save and refresh, nothing is going to happen. The condition has evaluated to false, therefore we don't enter the if statement, we don't execute the code. So how do we want this? How do we get this to run? Well, all we need to do is negate it using the logical not operator. So now what we need to do is, instead of testing to see if they are a member, let's test to see if they're not a member. So all we need to do is just say not is member. So now what's going to happen is we're testing to see if they are not a member. So remember, the logical operator negates the value. So for example, if we had false and we use the logical not operator on it, so not false, that would evaluate to true, okay? Now in this example, is member has a value of false. We are negating it. We're saying not false, so not false evaluates to true. So therefore, if not is member, that is true, we are now going to alert out sign up now. Use the exclamation mark there for the fun of it, why not? So now if we save and refresh, we get this page says sign up now. Okay, awesome. So guys, that was just an example of the logical not operator in action. Maybe you're working for a streaming service and you're checking to see if someone is not logged up to the platform. You're alerting out, please sign up. Okay, that's great. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay guys, welcome back. In the next 3 to 4 minutes, we're going to learn about the ternary operator in JavaScript. As soon as my clock hits 26 minutes, I'm going to end the video. So I've got a limited amount of time to teach you about the ternary operator. So the ternary operator in JavaScript is an alternative to using the else if statement. It is a more concise way of testing whether a condition evaluates to true or false, so it is more concise syntax. How it works is the ternary operator has 3 operands to it. There is the condition, what it is you're trying to test for, followed by a question mark. Then we have the truity expression, the expression that executes if the condition you're testing for evaluates to true, followed by a colon. Then we have the false expression, the expression that executes if the condition you're testing for evaluates to false. Okay? So for example, the condition might be, is the number 20 greater than 10? Followed by a question mark. If that's true, you run this piece of code. If it's false, you run that piece of code. Let's just do one very quick example, okay? So what I want to do is let's test to see if the number 20 is greater than the number 10. So we're testing our condition. Will we say 20 greater than 10? Is it? Question mark. And then we have our piece of code we want to execute if that condition evaluates to true. So we'll just log out to the console, true. Alternatively, we have our colon, then the piece of code you want to run if that condition we're testing for evaluates to false. So we can say false, and then semicolon to end our statement there. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, 20 greater than 10, question mark, is it? 20 is greater than 10, so the condition evaluates to true, and if the condition evaluates to true, we execute that piece of code there, the truity expression, which comes right after the question mark. So we're going to execute this piece of code, console.log true. If I save and refresh in the browser, we get true. Okay? Then we have our colon, and then we have the false expression, the piece of code that executes if the condition we're testing for evaluates to false. In this case, 20 greater than 10 evaluates to true, so we execute the truity expression, not the false expression. Okay? What we could do is we could check to see if the number 20 is greater than the number 55. What's going to happen? Well, is the number 20 greater than 55? No, it's not. So question mark, no, it's not. This will evaluate to false, and we know that if the condition evaluates to false, we do not execute the truity expression, no. We execute the false expression. So we're not going to log out to the console. We're not going to execute this piece of code, console.log true. The truity expression only runs if this condition evaluates to false. Sorry, I should have said, apologies. The truity expression only runs if the condition evaluates to true. If the condition evaluates to false, you run the piece of code after the colon. So we're going to run out this piece of code here, or execute this piece of code, console.log false. So to prove that to you, if I save and refresh, we get false. Okay, awesome. We're now out of time. So guys, that was the ternary operator in JavaScript. It is used for testing whether a condition evaluates to true or false. If the condition evaluates to true, you execute the truity expression, or that piece of code there, after the question mark and before the colon. If the condition evaluates to false, you run the piece of code after the colon, i.e. the false expression. In this recent example, it was this piece of code here that executed. Thank you. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to the switch statement in JavaScript. So this chapter 2 in this course, is all about decision making and control flow in JavaScript. So far we've seen different ways we can make decisions. We've seen 4 different ways. We've seen the if statement. If you want to evaluate if a condition is true, run some code. We've also seen the else if statement and the else statement, and we've also seen the ternary operator. But what if you were looking to check for a value that had potential multiple values, such as days of the week or months of the year? Days of the week, there's 7 days. What you could do is you could write an else if, but it is quite messy. We're writing an if statement to check to see, or the if block here. So this is an else if statement, but we're using the if condition to check to see if the day of the week is Monday. If not, we have an else if for Tuesday, an else if for Wednesday, an else if for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then an else for Sunday, right? So it is quite a bit messy. So there's another way we could check for this in JavaScript, and that is with the switch statement, which I've written down here. So what the switch statement is, essentially, let me just paste this up here. We'll delete this guy and uncomment that guy out. The switch statement is another way where we can check for a condition in JavaScript if something has evaluated to true or false. So for example, we want to check to see what the day of the week is. We could say let day be equal to, it actually is Saturday as I record this video. That's what I do on my Saturdays. I could be going for a walk, but there you are. So basically, the day is Saturday, and how the switch statement works is you have this switch keyword, and then inside of parentheses, the condition you're checking, okay? So in this case, we're checking for day, right? And then you have curly braces, so the opening and closing curly brace. And inside of here, you're checking for different cases. So if the case is Monday, we run this code here. We log out to the console Monday. You'll notice as well, we have a break condition. So basically, if the condition was true, if the day of the week was Monday, what you want to do is you want to break out of the switch statement. There's no need to get JavaScript to check to see if the day is Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday if you know it's Monday. So basically, in terms of the syntax, let me just write this out for you. You use the keyword switch. Inside of parentheses, the condition you're looking to evaluate. Okay, so what condition is it you're looking to evaluate? And then you have the different cases. So use the keyword case. So for example, it could be Monday. Okay, then you have your colon, then whatever code it is you want to execute. So code that you want to execute, in this case, maybe logging something out of the console. And then you use the keyword break to break out of the switch statement if that condition evaluates to true. You can also have a default condition as well if none of the conditions evaluate to true. So to just show you that in action, if I just delete this, let's say the day of the week was an empty string, so it had no value. Well, we enter this switch statement. We're checking to see if day has a value of Monday. It does not, so we do not enter this code block here. Okay. Is it Tuesday? No. Is it Wednesday? All the way down, the switch statement is essentially switching through each of these cases, trying to find the match. Basically, because there's no Monday to Sunday in the day variable here, we actually revert to the default and we just say console.log unknown day of week. And there's no need to use the break statement down here because it's the end of the switch statement, okay? There's really no point. So unknown day of week. Okay, awesome. So that is the switch statement in JavaScript. What we can do is just write this out together, okay? Just for practice. So we'll set the day of the week to be, let's do Saturday. I like Saturdays. Okay. So how do we do this? Well, like I say, let's just use the syntax we've just learned. You use the switch keyword, parentheses, then we have our curly braces, okay? You want to check for whatever it is you're checking for. So, you know, days of the week, months of the year, etc. So we'll check for the day, okay? And then what you want to do is you want to have your different cases. So I'll say case, Monday. Please bear with me, okay? So we have the case of Monday. And what we want to do, if the case is Monday, we want to just log something out of the console. We'll say console.log Monday, okay? And then if the day of the week is Monday, we can use the break keyword to break out of the switch statement, okay? So feel free to pause this video and see if you can write out a switch statement by yourself, save, run it in the browser and see what happens, or you can continue to code along with myself. So now what we'll do is we will just paste this out a couple of times. So each time, so that's going to be Tuesday. So we have, let's see here, Tuesday, Wednesday. So Tuesday, Wednesday. So basically the switch statement, the syntax is a lot easier to read than, you know, a long else if, you know, so it's just another way that you can make decisions in JavaScript. Okay, so let's just come down here. I'll just do case. I'll do like an empty string. I'll put in Thursday in a moment, and then we'll just log out to the console, console.log, empty string, and then break, and then I'll just copy and paste that in a few times. So this is going to be Thursday. Okay, so let's just Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, so case is Thursday. We want to log out to the console Thursday. Okay, and we have a break condition. Expression expected. Oops, my apologies. Yeah, so the case is Thursday. So that's why I'm getting an error there. So just have to correct it. So case is going to be Thursday. Case is Friday. We're going to log out Friday. Console.log Friday. So the case is going to be Saturday. So that's my bad. I apologize. Yes. So you have case, the keyword, colon, the condition, or the code that's going to execute with the break keyword. So apologies for that. Okay, so we have Sunday, constant logout Sunday, and then let me just make sure I've indented this correctly. So we've case, nice nesting there. You want to bring that back. So case Friday, case Saturday, case Sunday. This is making me happy now getting this correct. And then you want to have basically the default, right? So remember, we have the default here. So it's not a case, it's just default, colon, and then whatever code you want to run. If there's no day of the week, maybe we'll just say, day of the week unknown or invalid or something like that. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. We've created a day variable assigned the value of Saturday. Then we have the switch keyword. We're trying to check what day of the week it is. So we enter the switch statement. Remember, the day of the week is Saturday. So the switch statement is going to evaluate if case is Monday, day is not equal to Monday, so we don't enter this code block here. It's going to evaluate, is it Tuesday? No. Is it Wednesday? No. Thursday? No. Friday? Remember, if any of these conditions were true, you'd execute the code block, so console.log Friday, and then break out of the switch statement. In this case, it's Saturday, but I've logged out an empty string, so let's fix that. So console.log Saturday. Then we have the case of Sunday, we log out Sunday, break, and then we have the default. So if I save and refresh, I'll change the day variable as well, so you see this in action, Saturday. But if I was to change the day to be, let's say, let's do Thursday. Thursday's an okay day. We enter the switch statement. Our switch statement is going to evaluate if the day is Monday. That is not true, so we do not enter the code block. We do not log out of the console that the day of the week is Monday. Then it's evaluating if it's Tuesday, nope, keep going, Wednesday, nope, Thursday, this evaluates to true. Case is Thursday, so what we do is we enter this code block, we execute that line of code, console.log Thursday, then we break out of the switch statement. We don't check to see if the day of the week is Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. We've already got our answer, so the break keyword breaks us out of the switch statement. Okay? If I just save and refresh, you see the day of the week is Thursday. If hypothetically the day variable had a value of, let's say, null, okay, what happens? Well, let's save and refresh. It's not a string, so we're not going to get any valid day of the week. What's going to happen is we're going to get our default day of the week is unknown. So the default is quite useful. You can run a piece of code if the condition you're looking for, in this case the day of the week, isn't actually one of the days of the week. Okay, so that is the switch statement in JavaScript. I'd encourage you to see if you could write a switch statement with maybe the months of the year just for practice, but it is another way of making decisions in JavaScript, and the code is much more easy on the human eye to read rather than a messy else if statement with just multiple conditions. So the switch statement is quite appropriate to use if you're checking the value of a variable and it is potentially multiple possible outcomes. So it's quite useful if you're looking for, let's say, the day of the week, the month of the year, maybe even a US state, right? Because there's a lot of US states, okay? Right, so that is a switch statement in JavaScript. I will see you in the next tutorial. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to start talking about loops in JavaScript. So what is a loop? Well, a loop in JavaScript is used to run some piece of code over and over again. So in other words, let's say hypothetically, you want to log out to the console numbers 1 to 100, okay, for some reason. So far, based on what we've learned, we'd have to say console.log, the number 1, and then console.log the number 2, like this, right? So we could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think I will make you suffer. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay? So I'm now going to log out of the console numbers 1 through 10. Let's save and refresh. And we get numbers 1 to 10. Okay, awesome. Now the problem is, if we have to do that up to 100 or 1,000 or whatever the case may be, we'd have to write an awful lot of code. So a more concise way of doing this is with a loop. So that's what we're going to talk about in this tutorial. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the for loop in JavaScript. Okay, so loops are great because, as I say, you can execute a piece of code over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to you about the syntax of a for loop before we write one out together. So how it works is you write the keyword for, okay, then you have your parentheses, and then you have your curly braces. So inside of the curly braces will be the code block, i.e. the code you want to run. So we've seen code blocks before, okay? Now, when we saw with an if statement, when we looked at if statements, if some condition evaluated to true, we would then run some code. But with a for loop, okay, if you think about it, if we're going to start counting at one variable and count up to another variable, the for loop needs some information. So there's actually 3 pieces of information you have to provide a for loop with, okay? So they are, and don't be intimidated by the terminology here, I'm going to basically spell it out in simple English just in a moment. But what you have first of all is the initialization variable, okay? So the initialization variable. Then we have the condition we're evaluating. So while that condition is true, the loop will run. And then we have what is known as the final expression, okay? Now, let's write that out again, but I'll translate it into English. Initialization variable, what is that? That's basically us initializing the count, okay? So for example, if you want to start counting the loop at, let's say, number 1 up to 10, so this would be number 1. So what this is just us basically initializing, I can't spell, I'm sorry, initializing the count, or starting the counter is another way of talking about that. We have our condition that we're, running the loop while that condition is true. And then the final expression, well, really what that's going to be is that's going to be an increment or decrement counter, okay? So if you are circling through a loop, let's say you print out the number 1, after you run the loop, you then want to increase the counter, so we know then that we need to do the number 2, okay? So that is the theory, and remember, the code block is another way of us saying, run some code, okay? So that's the theory of a for loop. It's probably best we actually just write one out in practice. So let's do that. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the for keyword, then we have our parentheses, and then we have our curly braces, okay? Now, inside of the for loop, what we first of all want to do is we want to initialize the count. So we can set our counter variable. So we can say let counter be equal to, we'll start the count at 1. Then we have a semicolon, okay, because we're now on to another statement. We're going to have our condition. We want to run the loop while the counter is less than or equal to 10, because I want to count from 1 up to 10 inclusive. And after each loop, because the thing about loops is loops run over and over again, the loop has to know when to stop, okay? So if you don't have a counter at the end or the final expression, you're never changing the counter variable. So you could enter what is known as an infinite loop. The loop just keeps running forever, and we don't want that. So what we can do is we can just have our counter variable and say counter plus plus, okay? Now, in terms of syntax, right? So we have our counter variable. In the opening part of the for loop, where we initialize the variable or the counter, I'm saying let counter be equal to 1, okay? I've already declared the counter variable. So over here, I don't need to say let counter again. We've already initialized that variable. So here we're saying we're going to run the loop while counter is less than or equal to 10, okay? And then after each loop iteration, we're just going to increase the counter. So what I'm going to do is, let's just log out to the console, console.log. I am in loop number, and then whatever counter we're on. Okay, so the counter variable, comma separate. Okay, so what's going to happen is, let me just first of all, so you understand the control flow, the order of execution here. So I'm going to log out to the console. I am before the loop, and after the loop has run multiple times, we're just going to log out to the console. I am after the loop. Okay, awesome. So what's going to happen? Well, all of this is just comments, right? We can delete all of that. Okay. So we're going to log out to the console, console.log, I am before the loop, okay? JavaScript will do that for us. Then we're going to come down to the for loop, okay? So we have the keyword for, we have our opening and closing parentheses, okay? So the loop is going to run, okay? So how this works is this. We start the counter variable at 1. So we've used the let keyword, we've created a variable, we've said let counter equal 1. That is us initializing the variable. Counter has a value of 1. Then the for loop is going to say, okay, is 1 less than or equal to 10? That will evaluate to true. The number 1 is less than or equal to 10. So using the less than or equal to comparison operator, we're doing a check here. So the first time the loop runs, it's going to say 1 is less than or equal to 10. That evaluates to true. Then what happens is we enter the curly braces. So we enter the code block. So we're going to log out, I'm in loop number 1. Okay. Then what happens when the loop has run for the first time, we come up here to the counter variable and we just increment it. So remember, plus plus means just add 1 to the counter variable. So now it has a value of 2. So now what's going to happen is the counter variable has now a value of 2. So we're going to come here and it's going to say, okay, is 2 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. That evaluates to true. So we enter the loop again and we say, I'm in loop number 2. That loop has now ran again. So after the loop has executed, we come up here to the final expression. We're going to add to the counter again. We're going to add 1. So now counter has a value of 3. So then we say, is 3 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. That's true. So we enter the loop, execute the code. After it runs, we come up here and increment the counter again. So this is going to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, stop. What happens is, when the counter variable eventually has a value of 10, it's going to say, okay, is 10 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. 10 is less than or equal to 10 because they're the same. That evaluates to true. We enter the loop for the last time. We log out to the console. I'm in loop number 10. Then we come up here. We add to the counter variable using the increment operator. Remember, the increment operator is just plus plus, so that adds 1 to a number each time. So when we add 1 to the number 10, we're going to have 11. Then the loop's going to say, okay, is 11 less than or equal to 10? That evaluates to false. We no longer run the loop. We exit the loop now, and we continue executing the code in our JavaScript file. So then we're going to see I am after the loop. So what's going to happen when we save and refresh? We're going to see I am before the loop. Then we're going to see I'm in loop number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we're going to see I am after the loop. So let me just save and refresh. And we see here, I am before the loop. I am in loop number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 10. And then we have I am after loop. So that is the for loop in JavaScript. Let's talk about this again in the next tutorial, because we're new to loops. So we'll see you in the next one. But the key thing about the for loop in JavaScript, it is very popular because it can be used to run a piece of code over and over again while some condition is true. Okay, great. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, welcome back. In this tutorial, we're just going to continue working with the for loop in JavaScript, but instead of just logging out numbers to the console, I want you to be aware that for loops actually work very well with arrays. So for the first time in this course, we're going to use the for loop to iterate over an array of values, okay? So we have that to look forward to in this tutorial. Before I do that, however, I just want us to log out to the console numbers 1 to 10, just for a bit more practice, okay? So just so you're familiar with the for loop syntax. So we know what we can do is we can use the for keyword. So we have our for loop, and what we need to do is initialize our counter variable. So I'm going to say let counter be equal to 0. We're going to start counting at 0, and what I want to do is I want to run the counter variable while it is less than or equal to 10. So we've seen this syntax before, And after each loop iteration, I just want to use the increment operator to increment the value of counter. Okay? And then what I can do is just log out to the console. I am in loop number. Okay? And all we're going to do here is just comma separate and log out our counter variable. Okay, awesome. So what have we done here? We've used the for keyword to create a for loop, and inside of parentheses we have our three expressions. Here we are initializing our counter variable. We're saying let counter equal 0. So the let keyword is used for the first time here as we initialize a counter variable with the value of 0. So we're going to start counting at 0. You can change that to be 1 if you want to count from 1 to 10 inclusive. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have our while condition, and essentially we're going to run the loop while counter is less than or equal to 10. Okay, so while this condition evaluates to true, we're going to keep entering the code block for the for loop or running the loop. Okay, so then what we do is we enter the loop for the first time and we just log out to the console. I am in loop number 1. Then we come up here to the final expression. After each loop iteration we come up here, and essentially what we do is we just add 1 to the counter. Remember, we've seen the increment operator. The increment operator using plus plus just adds 1 to a number. So counter had a value of 1. After the first loop runs, we add 1 to it, so now counter has a value of 2. So we log out I am in loop number 2. Then we add 1 to it, so now counter has a value of 3. And then we check our condition. Is 3 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. So we enter the loop, etc., etc. Okay? So let's just save and refresh. And we get I'm in loop number 1 all the way up to 10. And if you wanted, you could change that to 20 to run from numbers 1 up to 20. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Now, what I want us to do is I want us to use a for loop to iterate over an array of values. Okay, so that's what I want to do in this tutorial. Now, we know how we can log out different values of an array. So remember, arrays start counting at index 0. So heroes at index 0 would be Superman. Heroes at index 1 would be Batman. Heroes at index 2 would be Wonder Woman. And heroes at index 3 would be the Flash. To prove that to you, if I just say console.log and I want to log out heroes, okay, but I want to log out the various indexes. So that's going to be Superman. We're going to just log them all out to the console. I want you to see this. We can change this for loop, by the way, just to, run from numbers 1 to 5. I don't necessarily need multiple values. Okay, so index 1, index 2, and index 3. So what's going to happen? Well, this is going to log out to the console Superman, Superman. This is going to log out Batman. And remember, the reason this logs out Batman is heroes is an array. Arrays, we know in JavaScript, start at the 0 at index, okay? So when you log out heroes at index 0, it's going to be Superman. Heroes index 1 will be Batman. Heroes at index 2 will be Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman. And then finally, heroes at index 3 is going to be the Flash, okay? So let's just save and refresh. And we see there we've logged out Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Flash, and then all of these different loops, right? Now what I want to do is, instead of logging out to the console, I'm in loop number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's start counting at 0 and use that to log out the values of the heroes array. So what we can do is, instead of having to console.log out, heroes at index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, let's just essentially use a for loop for that. So what we're going to do is, we're going to start counting at index 0, okay? And then instead of logging out console.log, I am in loop number and whatever loop we're in, let's just paste in here console.log heroes at whatever index our counter variable is on, okay? So remember, when we log out console.log heroes at index 0, that's going to be Superman, right? Now, we can use a for loop to replace all of this code, And believe it or not, we've actually already done it. So to prove this to you, if I just delete all of this code, okay, what we can do is we can run the for loop for 0, 1, 2, 3. So we'll run this loop while the counter is less than or equal to 3, and this is going to log out our heroes, okay? To prove that to you, let me just save and refresh, and then we will explain what happened. We see here Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash, okay? So how did that work? Well, we've declared a for loop. We initialize the counter variable to be 0. So when we enter the loop, and we do, because remember, 0 is less than or equal to 3, that evaluates to true, we enter the code block here. So we say console.log heroes at index of counter, and this starts off at 0. So heroes at index 0 will be Superman, so we log that out to the console, okay? Then, after the loop runs, we increment the counter variable, so 0 plus 1 is 1. Then we log out console.log heroes at index 1, that'll be Batman. At index 2 will be Wonder Woman, and index 3 will be the Flash, okay? So let's just save and refresh, and we still get that. Okay, awesome. Now, just a couple of things to improve our code. It's common, I don't want to say behavior, what's the word I'm looking for? It's common practice or shorthand notation in JavaScript to use I. It's common convention when essentially writing a for loop. So instead of having counter, quite a very long word, you can just replace counter with I. So I is just a variable, and what it essentially denotes is essentially our counter variable. So this is still going to run. We're saying for let I be equal to 0. Okay, I is just a counter variable. It's still a counter. While I is less than or equal to 3, we want the for loop to run. And after each loop iteration, and when I say loop iteration every time you run the loop, just come up here and add 1 to it. Okay. Now, here's a problem. I've hard-coded this for loop to run while I is less than or equal to 3. But what if we were to add another hero to our array? Let's say Aquaman, right? Apologies for my spelling. Well, if I save and refresh, what's going to happen? We're not getting Aquaman. And that's because we've hard-coded this loop to run while I is less than or equal to 3. So you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, let's run it while I is less than or equal to 4. Problem solved, we now got Aquaman, right? Let's have a look. And we do, but here's a better way to do it. What you can do is you can actually access the length property of an array, okay? So for example, if I just show you this, if I say console.log heroes.length, this is actually going to essentially tell us how many elements are in the array. So if we save and refresh, we get 5, okay? So here we've written code that says, let's run the loop while I is less than or equal to 4, okay? But what we can do is we can actually change this. We can say, run the loop while I is less than heroes.length, okay? So we were running the loop from 0 to 4. This is still going to work, okay? I'll tell you why. Heroes.length, this array, has 5 elements to it, okay? And now I've changed the code here. I'm saying run while I is less than heroes.length. So run while I is less than 5. And the great thing about this is this code is dynamic. So if you add elements to the array, the code is still going to work. Let me just show you this, okay? So the code still works, right? No need to log that out to the console anymore. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another element to the array. So let's add Cyborg. I can't spell that, believe it or not. I apologize. I hope that's correct. But now if I save and refresh, our code has dynamically changed to include this. See? We get all the elements of the array. And this is because we know we have to start counting at index 0, but what we can do is we can run our for loop while I is less than the array name dot length, okay? So right now this array has 6 elements to it. So if we run while I is less than heroes.length, that'll be I is less than 6. So it's going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's going to stop. Because once we run for Cyborg, the last element in the array, we then come up here to our final expression, add 1 to I. So remember, plus plus is the increment operator. So now we have our counter variable I is at 6. So then when we check is 6 less than 6, that will evaluate to false, okay, because they're the same. So therefore, this condition evaluates to false. We stop running the loop and we continue on running the code in our script or our JavaScript file, okay? So guys, that is just a bit more practice with the for loop in JavaScript. I'll see you in the next tutorial. We'll continue to get a bit more practice with the for loop. It's very powerful. For loops work very well with arrays. And just a little takeaway, you're probably wondering, okay, Dara's showing me a for loop and he's showing me that works with an array, but why should I care? Well, just imagine if you were creating an application and you were sending a GET request to an API, you were getting in data, maybe the weather in various cities, okay? You could use a for loop to iterate over all the different elements in an array and then print it out to the screen, okay, if you're making an app. So we'll leave that tutorial there. I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in the last tutorial we saw how we could use a for loop to iterate over an array of values, so that was good. We're starting to build on our knowledge of for loops, because I don't just want to show you the syntax, i.e. the structure of how to write a for loop. I actually want to get you starting to think about how you can combine various pieces of code that we've learned to actually perform some sort of task. So in this tutorial, what I'd like us to do is I'd like to use a for loop to essentially log out to the console numbers 1 to 100 inclusive, so include the number 100. And after you've logged out a number, I want you to say whether it is an odd or an even number, okay? So how we're going to do this, I'll just tell you, and then I'll write the pseudocode, and then we'll write this out together, but see if you can do this yourself. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a for loop. We're going to initialize our counter variable, so we'll say let I equal to 1. We'll start counting at 1. We'll have some sort of condition, so we'll run the loop while I is less than or equal to 100. After each loop iteration, we want to increase our counter variable I, so we'll say I++. And then inside of our for loop, what we can do is, because we need to make a decision whether a number is odd or even, we can use an if statement. And we can combine the if statement with the modulus operator, which we've seen previously. So we know that an even number, let's say the number 10 mod 2, will divide unevenly, so there will be nothing left over, okay? Whereas if there is 1 left over, an odd number doesn't divide evenly into 2, there'll be 1 left over, so then we know it's an odd number, okay? So how we're going to do this, like I say, is basically create a for loop, create a loop that runs from 1 to 100, okay? Inside of the loop, what you want to do is you want to have an if statement. And inside of that if statement, you want to just log out to the console whether a number is odd or even, and you can do that using the modulus operator, okay? So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. Feel free to pause the video and see if you can write this yourself. Otherwise, feel free to code along with me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our for loop. So we're going to say for, and what we want to do, we want to run from 1 to 100. So first of all, we have to initialize our counter variable. So we could say let counter equal 1, but we'll just use I. I will denote our counter variable. Forgive my pronunciation and accent. So we're going to say let I equal to 0. Let's increase that to 1. My apologies. Then what we're going to do is we're going to run the loop while some condition is true, while I is less than or equal to 100, because you want to include the number 100, okay? If you were to say I is less than 100, it'll only run to number 99, assuming you increment the I operator, or sorry, the I variable, I should have said it's a variable, and you do that using ++. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say I++, okay? So I is a variable. Curly braces, okay? So what we've done now is we've created a for loop, and it's going to run from the number 1, let I equal 1. It's going to run while I is less than or equal to 100. And after each loop iteration, every time you run the loop or cycle through the loop, what we're going to do is we're just going to add 1 to our counter variable. So in here, what we can do is we can have our if statement. So I'm just going to say if, and remember, I is our counter variable, okay? So I'm going to say, well, essentially, I mod 2. So remember, if you're on, let's say, the number 2, right, let's say the counter variable was I equal 2, 2 mod 2 would divide in evenly, okay? So therefore, there'd be nothing left over. And that'll be the same for every even number. So we know that any number that divides in evenly to 2 will have a remainder of 0, okay? And that's because 2 divides in evenly to 2, there's nothing left over. 4 divides in evenly to 2, there's nothing left over. 6 divides in evenly to 2, there's nothing left over. So every even number, when you use the mod operator, I mod 2 will have nothing left over. So we know that will be an even number. So what we can do is just log out to the console, console.log, the value of I, and then we'll say is an even number, semicolon to end the statement. You can put a space there as well. And therefore we know if that condition doesn't evaluate to true, so whatever counter we're on, mod 2, if this condition doesn't evaluate to true, we know we must then be iterating over an odd number rather than an even number. So then we can just say else console.log I is an odd number. I is an odd number, and semicolon to end the statement, and you can just put a little space there. And yeah, I'm happy with the code. You can delete that line of space if you want. Okay, so let's save and refresh. Should this work? Let me just double check. We've created a for loop. We're saying let I equal 0. So we're starting our counter variable I at 1. Sorry, 1, not 0. Force a habit. Then we're going to run while I is less than or equal to 100. I++, we're iterating 1 to the counter each time we go through the loop. So the first time we enter the loop, I is a value of 1. We're going to say, okay, 1 mod 2. Well, 1 does not divide evenly into 2. That will evaluate to false. So the first time we run the loop, we're going to log out to the console. 1 is an odd number. We come up here, increment the I counter variable. So now I is a value of 2. So then we enter the loop again. 2 mod 2 is strictly equal to 0. That will evaluate to true because 2 mod 2 divides in evenly. There's nothing left over. So then we log out to the console. 2 is an even number. Okay. And then what happens is we add to the counter variable again, etc., etc. So if I just save and refresh, let me just see, we get 1 is an odd number, 2 is an even number, 3 is an odd number, 4 is an even number, all the way down to 100. 100 is an even number. Okay, awesome. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. In this tutorial, we used the for loop to actually log out numbers 1 to 100, and we did an if statement inside of the for loop to check to see if a number was odd or even using the modulus operator. So one of the key things you're starting to learn now about JavaScript is you can actually use different pieces of code together. You can use a for loop to iterate over an array of values. You can nest an if statement inside of a for loop, okay? So there's quite a lot we can do. So see you in the next tutorial where we will continue our learning journey together. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I'd like us to do is I'd like us to just create a for loop, but instead of counting from 1 to 100, let's count from 100 down to 1. So rather than increasing the counter variable I using the increment operator after each loop iteration, i.e. every time the loop runs, let's actually start counting at 100 and use the decrement operator to take away every time our loop runs, to take away 1 from our counter variable. So just to remind you how this works, I don't know why I was going to comment code that. Let's actually write the code. Tell you what, I'll tell you what, just follow on. If I was to create a variable, if I was to say let number be equal to 20, okay, and then I use the decrement operator, I say number minus minus. If I was to then log out the value of number, number would have a value of 19, okay? So remember, we've seen the decrement operator before. So let's just create a for loop. So we'll say for, we'll say let I, our counter variable, remember I is just a counter, so we can say let I equal 100. we're going to start counting at I, and we want to run our loop while I is greater than or equal to 1. And after each loop iteration, we don't want to increase the value of I, our counter variable. We want to decrement it. We want to take away 1. So what we can do is we can say I minus minus, okay? So a good example of this is maybe you have some sort of guessing game, and every time the user gets a guess wrong, you want to take away 1 from their lives, maybe they only have a few guesses or lives, etc. So this is a very good example of where you could use the decrement operator with a loop. And then all we'll do is just log out to the console.log loop number, we'll just comma separate and log out I, okay? So let me just review the code. I want to make sure we don't end up in an infinite loop, a loop that runs forever. So you always have to be careful you don't do that. So for keyword for, we have a for loop. I'm saying let I equal to 100. So we're starting our counter variable at I. We're going to run while I is greater than or equal to 1. And after each loop iteration, we use the decrement operator minus minus to take 1 off the counter variable. So the first time we enter the for loop, we're going to say console.log loop number 100. Okay. Then we're going to come up here and take 1 from it. So it's going to be loop number 99, loop number 98, all the way down to 1. And then the loop doesn't run anymore, because then what happens is I minus minus 1 minus 1 will have a value of 0. So with 0 greater than or equal to 1, that will evaluate to false. We'll stop running the loop. Okay. So if I just save and refresh, we see here we count down loop number 100 all the way down to loop number 1. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how you can use the for loop in JavaScript with the decrement operator. In other words, you can count from a number down rather than starting at a number and counting up. That's awesome. This is a short tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Hey friends, and welcome back. Okay, what I've done is I've created a variable called letters, and I've assigned it the value of this array, this string array. So as you can see, I've basically typed out all the letters of the alphabet. So what I want to do is I want us to do 2 challenges, challenge 1 and challenge 2. In the first challenge, I want you to write a loop that iterates over this array of letters and just logs out to the console letters A up to Z or Z. And then what I want you to do is write another loop, but that loop you'll use the decrement operator and you'll count backwards from Z to A. Okay? So for the first loop, or loop 1, we're going to use the increment operator. And for the second challenge, loop 2, we're going to use the decrement operator. Okay? So this just gives us a bit of practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a for loop. I'm going to say for. I'm going to say let I, our counter variable, be equal to 0. Okay? Then what I want to do is I want to iterate over this array of letters while I is less than letters dot length. Okie dokie. And I want to increment I after each count. Okay? So what we're going to do here is just use the increment operator. Okay? So remember, let I equal 0. We're starting our counter variable. So we know if we console.log out letters at index I, the first time this runs, it's going to be A. And we know it's while there's 26 letters in the alphabet, A is at index 0, this is at index 25, but there are 26 elements, so we're going to run while I is less than letters.length, so up to 25, okay? So if I just console.log out letters, sounds like a Miley Cyrus song, at index I, this should hopefully work. So we should log out A, B, C, D, all the way up. So that's, whoops, apologies, just looking at my tiny little YouTube count, not that many people are looking at these videos right now. So we get A all the way up to Z. Okay, awesome. Now I want us to write a second loop. So I'm going to say for, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to count backwards, right? So this time I'm going to say let I be equal to, and instead of hard coding what I think is going to be the index, I actually just want to let I be equal to letters dot length. Okay, so we're actually going to start our counter at the last element of the array. okay? And then what I'm going to do is I want to iterate over the letters while I is greater than or equal to 0, okay? So I want to, because remember, we're doing it backwards this time. So this time I'm saying let I, our starter variable, be equal to letters.length. So there's 26 letters here, okay? So what we can do is we can actually just say that's actually equal to letters.length minus 1, because there's 26, you want to take 1 for it, that's index 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Yeah, so my apologies. I is going to be equal to letters.length minus 1, okay? Because there's 26 letters, so that would be 26, but letters at index 26 would be undefined, so you want to take 1 from it. We're going to run while I is greater than or equal to 0, and after each loop iteration, we just want to say I minus minus. Then we have our curly braces, and we're just going to log out to the console, console.log, letters at index I. I could have just copied the code up here, but I just like to get into the practice of writing stuff out. So now what's going to happen is we should start counting from Z down. Let me just, should I comment that guy out? Yeah. Let me just save and refresh, and let's see if we get this to work. And now we're counting from Z all the way down to A, okay? And remember, there's 26 letters in the alphabet, so this is actually index 5, because like I say, arrays in JavaScript, we start counting at 0. So it's actually 0 up to 25 rather than 1 to 26. So that's why here I said let I equal to letters.length, because 26 take 1 is 25, and this is index 25, okay? So letters at index 25 actually has a value of Z or Z, and then we're counting down. So then what we're doing is we're running the loop while the counter is greater than or equal to 0. So while 24 is greater, 24 is greater than or equal to 0, 23 is greater than or equal to 0, all the way down to A. You want to do greater than or equal to, because 0 is greater than or equal to 0 will run. So you don't want to do like I is greater than 0, because then you won't get A. If I actually just save and refresh, I can just prove that to you, because it'll only run to index 1. So we get to B, but we don't get to A. So just make sure you say I is greater than or equal to 0. And remember, because we're using the decrement operator, we're counting from Z to A. In other words, the end of the array to the start of the array. You want to use the decrement operator, okay? And then we're just logging out to console, letters at index I. Okay, I hope that was a fun little tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to the while loop in JavaScript. So there's more than just the for loop in JavaScript. You can also write a while loop, and a while loop runs while some condition is true. So basically, like it says in the tin, while some condition is true. Okay, so basically how you do this is you write the keyword while, you evaluate some condition inside of parentheses, then inside of your curly braces you can run some code. After that code runs, we increment our counter, and you can initialize the counter variable before the loop. So probably make more sense if I should show this to you. So it's a bit unusual in the sense that we actually define the counter variable before we get to the while loop, okay, the while. So what we can do is we can say I'll say counter rather than I, just so you can visualize this a bit easier. I'm going to say let counter be equal to 0, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say while, we want to run our loop while some condition is true, okay? So what we can do is we can say we want to run the loop while counter is less than or equal to 10, okay? Then inside of curly braces, we're going to run code while this condition here evaluates to true. So what we could do is we just say console.log, I am in loop number, oh, I spelled correctly, awesome, okay, comma, separate, counter, okay? So the first time the loop runs, we're just going to log out, I'm in loop number 0, and then I'm in loop number 1, 2, 3, etc. For that to happen, however, don't forget we need to use the increment operator. So just say counter plus plus, okay? So the syntax is a bit different to the for loop. You use the while keyword. While some condition evaluates to true, you can run some piece of code. I've just gone with a single line statement here, so you can write multiple lines of code. It doesn't just have to be one. After all that code executes, what I want to do is I want to just increase our counter variable using the increment operator. Remember, plus plus is the increment operator. We're simply adding 1 to our counter variable after each loop iteration. When I say loop iteration, I mean each time we've gone through the loop. And up here is where we are essentially initializing and declaring our counter variable. We're declaring our variable and initializing it with a value of 0 for the first time. Okay, so let's see this in action. Let's save and refresh. I'll come down to Chrome. And we see here, I'm in loop number 0 all the way up to 10. Okay, so that is the while loop in JavaScript. If you just want to get a bit more practice, let's comment that guy out. Essentially what you do is, maybe we could do a challenge. Can you get a while loop to log out numbers 1 to 5? What you do is you would say while, okay? And remember, I haven't actually declared a counter variable here. So you do that before you get to the while loop. So I can say let I be equal to 1, okay? And we want to run our loop while I is less than or equal to 5. Then we have our curly braces, the code we're going to run while that condition there evaluates true. So we'll just say console.log loop I, okay, so that will be 1 the first time the loop runs, and after each iteration, each time you run the loop, let's just increment I, our counter variable, by saying I++. So what's going to happen is, we've declared I, our counter variable, we've assigned it the value of 1, then our script file, JavaScript, is going to come down here, and it's going to say, okay, they want me to run while some condition is true. Well, is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. That evaluates to true. Therefore, we just log out of the console loop 1. Then, after that is ran, we increment our counter variable I++. So now I is a value of 2. So we come back up here. Is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. Condition evaluates to true. Therefore, we enter the loop. So it's loop 2. Then we increment I. So it's loop 3, loop 4, loop 5, etc. So we're going to run from 1 to 5. Remember, when we enter the loop when I is a value of 5, 5 is less than or equal to 5, that will evaluate to true. Then we log out code for the last time, we say loop 5. Then we increment I, so 5 plus 1 will be 6. Therefore, the next time JavaScript checks, it'll say, is 6 less than or equal to 5? No, that's not true. Do not enter the while loop. Continue executing whatever code is later on in the file. Okay, so let's save and refresh. See what we get? We get loop 1 to 5. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is just an introduction to the while loop in JavaScript. We'll do a couple more videos where we just get a bit more practice with the while loop. So I'll see you in the next one. Okay, what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to use the knowledge we've learned about the while loop to create a guessing game where the user has to guess a number between 1 and 5. If they guess the correct number, what happens is we just make them guess again. Okay, so just to give the answer, I've hard-coded this to be 2. So if the user was to enter the number 2, press OK, we get congrats, you won, and then the game is over, okay, and you won. Okay, so how I coded this up, I'll talk you through the code and then we'll write it out again together is, I've created this variable user wins and assigned it the value of false. We want to keep track of whether the user has won the game or not, okay? So basically, while the user has not won, we're going to keep the game running. And then what I did was I just created a variable called correct number and I assigned that the value of 2. So I haven't used mat.random or anything like that to, I suppose you could say, dynamically generate a number. The key point of this tutorial is, now that we've learned the while loop, we're going to apply it in a relatively basic way. So later on in this course, we can actually make a more interesting guessing game where we use mat.random to generate a random number, and then the user has to guess that number. So now we enter the while loop. And remember, the while loop runs while some condition evaluates to true, okay? Now I've set user wins, that variable, I've assigned it the value of false. So the while loop is going to run while user wins is not equal to true. And remember, false is not equal to true, so that evaluates to true. therefore we enter the while loop. Then what happens is I just use prompt, I prompt the user and I give them instructions, just this string. I say guess a number between 1 and 5, okay? Then what I do is I just basically convert that to type number. Just want to make sure that when they enter a number on their keyboard, it is converted to the number type, okay? And then all I do is essentially I just store that inside of user guess. Then what I do is I do an if statement to check to see if the user guess was the same as the correct number. So for example, if they were to guess the correct number, what happens is we enter the if statement, user wins has now been assigned the value of true, we alert out congrats you won, and then we just alert out the game is now over. We don't really need to say you won again, so the game is over. That makes more sense. And then what happens is we don't enter the loop again, because remember, we enter the loop when user wins is not equal to true, okay? But if the user guesses the right number, we then update the value of user wins. So therefore, once the user guesses the right game, we're going to have true is not equal to true. Well, that's false, right? Because true is equal to true. Therefore, we don't enter the while loop, okay? Probably make a bit more sense if we code this out together. So let's do that from scratch. Let me just have a sup of tea before we begin to code. Okay, awesome. So, like I say, we want to keep track of whether the user has won the game or not. So we can say let user wins and assign that the value of false. How can they start off the game having won it? They can't. So when the game starts, the user has not yet won. So we can say user wins is assigned a value of false. Then what we can do is we can just say let correct number be equal to, and you can hard code that to be a number between 1 and 5. I'll just say the number 2. Then we have our while loop. So we want to say while user wins is not equal to true, we want to enter the while loop. So our entire game is going to be inside of the while loop. So we know what we need to do is we need to prompt the user to enter a number between 1 and 5. So we can say please enter a number between 1 and 5. Maybe create a bit of space there. Semicolon to end the statement. And then what I want to do is I want to wrap all of that inside of number and just make sure that we convert that type to number. Okay? And that was supposed to be a semicolon at the end there. Okay? Now, we've prompted the user, whatever number they type in, we've converted the type number. What we need to do then is then store that inside of a variable. So I will say let user guess be assigned the value of whatever it is the user has guessed, okay? Then we need to do a check to see if the user has guessed the correct number or not. And we know how we can do that. We can use the if statement. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say if user guess, okay, the user has guessed the correct number is strictly equal to correct number, what do we want to do? Okay, well, what we want to do is we want to assign the user wins variable the value of true, because we'll have to enter a game. So user wins is now being assigned a value of true. Okay, remember at the start of the game user wins is value false, but if they guess the correct number, we want to just update that user wins to be true. Okay, then we want to let the user know that they've won, so we can just say alert something like congrats you won, congrats you won. Okay, and then if the user hasn't guessed correctly else, okay, remember we only enter the if code block if that condition evaluates to true. So we'll only enter this code block here, right, if the user has guessed correctly. If the user doesn't guess the correct number, we just come to the else block. So they haven't guessed the number correctly, we haven't changed the value of user wins, we just want to basically alert out guess again because they still haven't guessed the right number. So just say guess again, semicolon to end the statement, and then after the entire while loop is run, the game is over, we can just alert out game over. Okay, so let's save and refresh, see this in action. Guess number between 1 and 5, so if I say 4, guess again. If I say 5, guess again. But if I say the number 2, congrats, you won. and then the game is over. Okay, awesome. So guys, just to quickly recap, we created a very basic guessing game using the while loop in JavaScript. What we did here was we basically created a variable to keep track of whether the user had won the game or not. Okay, we initialize or start that variable to have a Boolean value of false. We assign it a Boolean value of false because remember, when the game starts, the user hasn't won yet, they haven't placed a guess. Then we do our while loop, we check our condition, while user wins is not equal to true. Basically, while false is not equal to true, we enter the loop. We basically prompt the user to enter a guess. We convert it to data type number. We store it in the variable user guess. Then we use the if statement to check to see if the user has guessed the correct number. If they have, you shouldn't only just alert out congrats you won. You need to make sure we don't enter the while loop again. So all you need to do is just update the value of user wins and assign it a value of true. Remember, you don't need to use the let keyword here. The variable has already been declared for the first time there. So all you need to do is just update the value of that Boolean variable user wins. Okay? And then alert out to the user. And the reason the game ends if the user has guessed correctly is because user wins now is a value of true. The next time we check the while condition to see if all of this evaluates to true, we're testing now to see if true is not equal to true. Well, you know, that's false. True not equal to true. They are equal to each other. Therefore, that evaluates to false. We don't enter the loop. So what happens is we continue on executing the code after the while loop, such as this alert here. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. And also as well, feel free to try use mat.random to generate a random number. And after the computer has done that, then do a while loop to check to see if you can guess the right number. Maybe a challenge is get the computer to generate a random number between 1 and 3. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next tutorial for more JavaScript learning. Okay, this would be a very short tutorial. All I want to do is just do one revision lecture on the while loop in JavaScript. So what we know is if we want to run our while loop, we use the keyword while, and inside of parentheses we are checking to see if some condition is true, and while that condition is true, we're going to enter the curly braces, i.e. the code block, and run some code. So what I want to do in this tutorial is let's just create a counter variable and just log out numbers 1 to 50 just for practice. So I could say let counter or let I, we'll say I, let I be equal to 50, and remember, oh sorry, we'll start it at 1. Actually what we can do is we'll do 1 to 50 and then we'll do another loop, same while loop, but we'll count from 50 back down to 1. So what I'm doing here is I am initializing the counter variable called I. So remember, I is our counter variable, so I'm just initializing that with a value. And what we want to do is we want the loop to run while I is less than or equal to 50. And while that is true, we're just going to log out to the console, console.log, loop, and then whatever I is. So the first time the loop runs, I will have a value of 1. And remember, after each iteration, each time we run the loop, we just want to increase our counter variable I. And all we need to do is just say I plus plus. And then semicolon to end the statement. So let me just save and then refresh. So this should log out numbers 1 to 50 inclusive. Awesome. Okay, we got 1 all the way down to 50. Okay, awesome. Now what I'd like to do is let's just write the while loop again, but this time let's count from 50 down to 1. See if you can pause the video and figure this out for yourself. But what I'll do is I'll just say let I be equal to 50. Okay. Then we have our while keyword. While some condition is true, we want to run the loop. So we're going to run the loop while I is, we'll say greater than or equal to 0. Actually to 1, we're counting to 1. And what's going to happen then is we're going to run our code while that condition is true. So console.log loop. So the first time the loop runs, I will have a value of 50. And remember, we want to this time use the decrement operator because we're counting down from 50 to the number 1. You don't want to increment I, okay, or you'll end up in an infinite loop, because what will happen is if you use the increment operator, remember plus plus, we're going to start counting at 50 and then 51, 52, 53. That condition will always evaluate to true. So you will be stuck in an infinite loop. So we don't want to use the increment operator. We want to use instead the decrement operator minus minus to take 1 from our counter variable I after each loop iteration. So we just say I minus minus, semicolon to end statement. Now let me just save and refresh. And now we've counted down from 50 down to 1. So that is the while loop revision lecture and how we can use the decrement operator with the while loop. There's going to be a challenge in the next tutorial regarding the while loop, and then we'll continue working with loops. See you in the next one. Okay, so we've seen the while loop a few times now. What I'd like to do in this tutorial is give you a challenge, see if you can code this up yourself. What I want you to do is, I want you to ask the user how many times they want to run the loop, and then the loop will run that many times, okay? So don't overthink it. It's actually a lot more simple than you think to write. All you need to do is you need to have some sort of prompt for the user. So let's just write out the pseudocode. What we need to do, well, we know we need to prompt the user with a message, essentially saying, you know, how many times do we want to run the loop? I think that was the quietest I've ever been recording one of these videos, LOL. Okay, the next thing you want to do then is you want to wrap that and just convert it to type number. So we've seen this before. We can use that inbuilt power in JavaScript, use number to convert the data type to number. Because remember, even if the user, if you prompt them, you store it in a variable, and they have, you know, pressed 4, 5, 6, 700, whatever the case may be, it's one of those weird behaviors of JavaScript where it's taken in a number as a string, so just convert it to type number and store it in a variable. And then lastly, use the while loop to run code over and over again. And in the condition, you can run the loop X amount of times, while some condition is less than, you know, the amount of times the user has instructed us to do. Okay, so see if you can pause the video and do this. What I'm going to do is, I'm just going to code this out now, so feel free to, I suppose you could say watch. Well, we know we're going to have to prompt the user, right, to tell us how many times they want to run. So what we can do is we can just say prompt, okay, so we know we have to use prompt. We know we're going to have our parentheses. Inside of that, we have some sort of string message we want to log out to the user, and then we're going to have a semicolon to end the statement. So what I'm going to do is just ask them, how many times do you want, would you want, how many times do you want to run the loop? Okay, maybe give them a little smiley face or something. That's nice. Okay, so we have our prompt, right? But remember, if the user presses a number on their keyboard, we're getting that as type string. So we want to just convert that to the number data type. So I have one parentheses there. And at the end here, I shouldn't have done the smiley face, it's confusing me. We're going to have another parentheses there. So that's good, right? We have our prompt and we are converting it to type number. I've given it away, but we haven't actually stored it in a variable. So that's what you want to do, because we want to keep some sort of record or track of how many times we're supposed to run the loop. So we could say let, and what we can do is just say times, okay, let times, the number of times we're going to run the loop, or iterations. Iterations would be a good one. I'll just leave it at times, okay? So let times equal to this prompt here, converted to data type number, okay? So now when I refresh the page, we see here how many times do you want to run the loop. I press 4, nothing happens, okay? Nothing has happened, okay? So we want to store that in a variable. So what are we going to do? Well, let's write out the syntax for a while loop. Well, we know that we have to have a counter variable somewhere. So we could say let counter be equal to, we'll start at 1. Then we're going to have a while loop. So while, now we're going to run the loop while some condition is true. So all we want to do is essentially say run the loop while our counter variable is less than or equal to times the number of times the user wants us to run. So for example, if they were to press 5, okay, and we're initializing our counter variable at 1, well, is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. Therefore, we enter the loop and we run some code. Obviously, we want to increment our counter variable using the increment operator. So from habit, I was going to type I++ there, but I've called the counter variable counter. So I want to say counter++, okay? And then we just want to run some code. We'll just log out to the console, loop number. And don't worry, the further we get into this course, the more we're going to start doing more interesting stuff rather than just logging stuff out of the console. But this is good practice. You're asking the user how many times they want to run the loop. So let's have a look. So we're prompting out to the user this message. How many times do you want to run the loop? We give them a smiley face because we're nice. Okay. So keep track of your parentheses. So that parentheses there closes with that parentheses. Then have another parentheses because that's all wrapped and being passed in here to number. So then we have times, the number of times we want to run the loop. So we initialize our counter variable here. So we initialize our counter variable called counter, and we're going to run the loop while counter is less than or equal to times. Okay, so let's say they press 5, console.log. We enter the loop because 1 is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so the loop's going to run. We're going to log out loop number 1, increment or counter 2, loop number 2, increment counter 3. 3 is less than or equal to 5, loop number 3, increment counter 4. 4 is less than or equal to 5, so that will run. And then finally 5 is less than or equal to 5. 5 is less than or equal to 5, that will be valid to true. Therefore we log out for the last time console.log loop number 5, and then counter plus plus. 6 is not less than or equal to 5, it's greater than, so the loop will stop running. Prove that to you. Let me just save and refresh. How many times do you want to run the loop? Let's press 5. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the loop ran 5 times. We can also put in a bigger number if you wanted. For example, if the user wanted to run 101 times, let's have a look. And there we go. We've ran the loop from the number 1 all the way up to 101. Okay, so that was just a little bit of a challenge there in JavaScript where you're asking the user how many times they want to run the loop. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to another type of loop you can use in JavaScript called the do-while loop. Okay, so we've seen the for loop and we've seen the while loop. So this one is called the do-while loop. And the key thing about the do-while loop is that the loop runs at least once, even if the condition it is checking for evaluates to false. So basically how it works is you declare your counter variable, then you have your do part of the do while loop. You're doing some piece of code while some condition is true. So let me just show you this, right, in terms of what the syntax looks like. So what it is you can have a counter variable. So for example, I could say let counter be equal to, we'll say 1, start the counter at 1. And then what you do is you do some piece of code, okay? You can do multiple lines as well. Multiple lines of code, okay? You do while some condition is true, okay? So that is the syntax of the do while loop. So you do some code while some condition is true, but what you'll notice is you're actually checking whether the condition evaluates to true or false after the code has executed at least once. So the key thing about the do while loop is that the code will run at least once, okay? Right, let me show you this in action. Well, let's create a counter variable. We'll just say I. We'll say let I be equal to, we'll say 1, okay? Then what we want to do is we want to run some code in here. So we'll say console.log I am in the loop number, then we just have I, and remember we have to as well keep track of what loop we're on. So because we're going to count up, I'll use the increment operator here. So we'll say I plus plus. And then we're going to check our condition. So we want to run the code inside of the do part of the do while loop while some condition is true. And maybe we just want to run the loop while I is less than or equal to 10. So we could say while I is less than or equal to 10. So what do you think is going to happen? Well, remember, all of this code is just comments, okay? That's not going to run. So we're saying let I equal 0. We're initializing our counter variable I with 1. And remember, I is just shorthand syntax for really counter. Then we have the do keyword. And inside of curly braces, we're going to run some code. So all we're doing is we're just doing a single line statement here. We're saying console.log, I am in loop number I. After that code executes, we then use the increment operator to add 1 to our counter. So you've seen now the increment operator many times. That is the increment operator. Then we have the while keyword, and that's going to run while some condition is true. So what's going to happen is I is going to have a value of 1. We're going to log out to the console. I am in loop number 1. Then what we do is we check to see whether the condition is true. So I is less than or equal to 10, that evaluates true, and then we add 1 to our counter. Okay, so the increment operator, that happens after the condition has been checked. So what this means is, even if this was false, even if I had a value of 11, the loop would run at least one time. So let me just save and refresh. So you see here, I'm in loop number 1 to 10. If I was to change I to be 11, what do you think is going to happen? Well, the loop will still run at least once, because we're saying I is equal to 11. Then we come down here to do. So it's going to say console.log, I am in loop number I, 11. Okay. Then it's going to check the condition. Then it says, okay, 11 is less than or equal to, it's going to say, okay, that's false. It shouldn't run the loop anymore. And then, essentially we increment I, but we don't enter the loop again. So if we just save and refresh, we get I am in loop number 11. Okay. So the key thing about the do while loop is that it runs at least once, and that is because you're checking the condition whether it evaluates to true after the loop has executed or ran at least one time. Okay, so that is the do while loop in JavaScript. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hey friends, and welcome back. Okay, we are now approaching the end of chapter 2 of this course. Chapter 2 has all been about control flow and decision making in JavaScript. Okay, however, while we've just seen the 3 main different types of loops you can use in JavaScript, the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop, I just want to do a few for loop challenges with you just to make sure you're comfortable using loops. Loops are very handy when working with other data types in JavaScript, such as arrays. The reason why loops are very important, by the way, is imagine you're trying to get in data from an API, like I've said previously. Maybe you're trying to get in stock data, or you're trying to get in clothes that you're going to have on your e-commerce website or videos, etc. Being able to understand loops is very important. So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to pause this video and try your best to do the 4 challenges I've laid out for you. Otherwise, you can keep watching. So the first challenge is, we're going to just use a for loop to log out numbers 1 to 10. Then we're going to reverse that. We're going to log out from 10 to 1, so counting down using the decrement operator. Then I want you to write a loop where you only log out numbers 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30, i.e. multiples of 5. And then lastly, can you write some code where you write out a for loop and you essentially log out just the even numbers? Okay, so that's what we have to look forward to in this and the next tutorial. For this tutorial, let's just start with the first 2 challenges. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a for loop. I'm going to say for, I'm going to say let counter be equal to 1. We want to start the counter variable at 1, and we want to run our loop while counter is less than or equal to 10, so it's 10 inclusive. And after each loop iteration, we just want to use the increment operator. Okay, and all we need to do is just say console.log and then our counter variable. So hopefully this is very familiar to you now. our counter is just a variable to keep track of what loop we're on. So we're saying let counter be equal to 1. Then there's going to be some sort of condition that is evaluated. So while counter is less than or equal to 10, well, that evaluates to true. The loop will run. We enter the code block, i.e. between the opening and closing curly brace, and then we just log out to the console log number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And remember, after each time we execute this code, the JavaScript statements within the code block, we just come up here and increment our counter variable. Okay? So if we save and refresh, we see number 1 to 10. Awesome. Now, I'm going to write out the for loop again, but this time we're going to do challenge 2. So this time we're going to use the decrement operator. So what I can do is I can create another for loop. We'll just do I this time, but remember I just represents our counter variable. So we say let I be equal to 10. We want to start counting at 10. And when do we want this loop to run? We want it to run while I is, you can say greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 1. Okay? So we want to run while I is greater than or equal to 1. If you want to have more concise syntax, you can just say while I is greater than 0, so while I is a positive number. And after each loop iteration, you just want to use the increment operator to just add to our counter variable. And remember, I is just our counter variable. So all we need to do here is just say console.log and then I. Okay, so what's going to happen is we have our for loop. We've created a variable called I. We've said let I equal to 10. Then we're going to check our condition. Is 10 greater than 0? That evaluates to true. So we just log out 10. Ah, my apologies. I'm supposed to use the decrement operator. This hot chocolate obviously hasn't increased my brain power. So yes, if I had have run that with the increment operator ++, we would have actually entered an infinite loop. The condition would have always been true because I would have been incrementing. Okay, because if you had I++, I won't run the code. What will happen here is I is greater than 10. Okay, sorry, I is 10. So then we check here, is 10 greater than 0? Yes, it is. We log out 10, but then we increment I, so it's 11, 12, 13, 14. We're in an infinite loop. The condition here that we're checking would always be true. So you want to make sure that when you're counting down, we're doing a loop backwards, you use the decrement operator so you don't get stuck in an infinite loop. So now what's going to happen is we've now satisfied the conditions for the challenge. I should have listened to my own advice here, i.e. use the decrement operator, I just forgot. So I is equal to 10. We're checking this condition. Is I greater than 0? Is 10 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So we just log out 10. Then we come up here and we decrement I, our counter variable. So now it has a value of 9. Then we do our check again. Is 9 greater than 0? That evaluates to true. So we log out 9. Then we come up here, decrement 1 from the number 9. And then eventually what happens is we get to 0. The condition is no longer true because 0 is not greater than 0. It's the same. That evaluates to false, and we stop running the loop. So if I save and refresh, we should now count down from 10 to 1. Awesome. I should have made a NASA joke there about Houston and takeoff. But guys, that is the first 2 challenges. Congratulations. I'll see you in the next tutorial where we're just going to log out the numbers essentially multiple to 5. So I'll see you in the next tutorial for more for loop practice. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial we're going to do challenges 3 and 4, but in order for us to do that, I want to introduce you to the additional assignment operator denoted by the += sign. Okay, so what is it? Well, let's say we have a number and we assign the number variable a value of 5, right? If I say let number equal 5, if I asked you to add 5 to it, what would you do? Well, what you could do is you could say number plus 5 and then assign that the value of number. So we could say number is equal to itself, i.e. 5 plus 5. Okay, so if I was to just log out to the console the value of number, so it should have a value of 5. If I log that out, if I can spell, keyboard isn't liking me today. So I've declared a variable called number, I've assigned it the value of 5, and all I've done is I have logged out of the console the string 5 and then the number variable. So what we should see is the string 5 and the number 5. So let's just have a look here. And we get 5, right? Now, if we were then to log out the value of number here, what do you think the answer is going to be? Well, number has a value of 5, and now what we've done is we've assigned it the value of itself plus 5. So number is equal to itself, number with a value of 5 plus 5. So we know 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. And now if I log out the value down here, what we should see is the number 10. So that's just the string 10 I'm logging out, and then we should see the number 10. So what we should see is 10 string and then 10. I'm just doing the string just so you can see where we are, but really it's 5 and 10. 5 the first time, 10 the second time. Right, let me just delete that and just make it a bit more concise. So really what I'm showing you is that we can keep adding 5 by just declaring the variable itself. Well, we've already declared the variable. I mean, you know, typing out the variable keyword. Sorry, typing out the name of the variable. Dara, get more coffee. So number is equal to number itself plus 5, and then that would give you a value of 15. But there's actually another way of doing this. And all you need to do is, instead of saying number is equal to number plus 5, you can just say number plus equal 5, and that'll work for you. That's the same thing as typing out the variable name and adding a number to it. So let me show that to you, right? So what we just did was we said let number equal 5. If we want to add 5 to it, what we were doing is we were then saying number is equal to number plus 5. But we don't need to do that. What we can do is, let me just comment this out and prove to you this still works, is we can actually say number plus equal 5. That is shorthand notation. That is a shorter way of essentially adding 5 to the number variable. So that will have a value of 10. And to prove that to you, if I just log out now the value of number, we should actually see 10 in the console. If I save and refresh, we see we get 10, okay? So guys, that is shorthand notation. This is the assignment operator, that if you want to add a value to a number, you don't need to say, you know, let number equal 5 and then number is equal to number plus 5. You can just say number plus equal 5. You could do plus equal 10 if you wanted to add 10 to it. So the reason I'm showing you this is now going to come in handy when we are doing this challenge here, which we're going to do right now. Previously I showed you the syntax for the for loop. We know that we create the for loop, we have some sort of counter variable, some condition, while that evaluates to true the loop runs, and we also have our increment operator. We saw the increment operator, the plus plus, but that only adds 1 to our counter variable after each loop iteration. Now what we can do is we can start our counter variable at 5, but then use plus equal 5 to add 5 after each loop iteration, okay, rather than just adding 1. And that could be very useful, for example, if we were making a game and if the user did something we want to add 5 to the score. So let's now create a for loop that logs out numbers 5 to 30. What we can do is we can say for, we'll say let I equal 5, we're starting our counter at 5, and we want to run the loop while I is less than or equal to 30, while that condition is true. And instead of using I++, what we can do is we can just say I plus equal 5, okay, and that's going to work for us. And to prove that to you, if I just log out the value of I, what are we going to get? Well, the first time the loop runs, we should get 5. We do our condition, is 5 less than or equal to 30? It is, that evaluates to true. Then what we do is we add 5 to our I counter variable. So then we log out 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Just to prove that to you, if I save and refresh, we get 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. Okay, so that's challenge 3. That's how we can use the additional assignment operator to count from 5 to 30, but doing it as in, like, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. We're going up in intervals of 5 rather than just going up in intervals of 1. Now that we've learned about the additional assignment operator, okay, We know that we could also use that therefore to log out all the numbers, all the even numbers from 2 to 10. So you could do some sort of if statement with a for loop, but because I've showed you this additional assignment operator notation, let's just do that very quickly and then we'll end this tutorial. So we can say for let I equal 2, okay? We want our loop to run while some condition is true. We want to run while I is less than or equal to 100. And after each loop iteration, we don't want to use I++. That would only increment I, our counter variable, by 1. We can use I plus equals 2, okay? So we are once again using the additional assignment operator. And remember, plus equal 2 is the same thing as saying I is equal to I plus 2. It's just shorthand notation. And now if we just log out to the console the value of I, we're going to log out numbers 2 all the way up to 100. By save and refresh, we get 2 all the way up to 100, okay? Because what we did was we declared I, we declared and initialized our counter variable I with a value of 2. We're running our loop while this condition evaluates to true, while I, our counter variable, is less than or equal to 100. We're going to enter the for loop, write out some code, and after each loop iteration, we're just going to add 2 to the counter variable, okay? So guys, congratulations, we've now completed the 4 challenges for the for loop. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I want us to do is I want us to create an array of type string. So we'll create an array of heroes. We'll stick with the DC universe. We'll say let heroes be equal to, and we'll put in our regular heroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, etc. But then what I want to do is I want us to create a for loop that logs out to the console the last element of the array, and using the decrement operator count down to the first element in the array, the element at index 0. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. So I'm going to say let heroes, whoa, that was not typing at all. Let heroes be equal to, and I'm going to say Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, hello Bruce, Robin, okay, and lastly we will do Aquaman. I can't spell cyborg, so I'll have to learn how to spell that for a future tutorial. Okay, now one thing is that we can access the length property of an array, okay? So for example, we know that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in this array. To prove that to you, if I say console.log, I'll just say something like elements total or number, comma separate. If I say heroes.length, okay, we know that should be equal to 5, okay? If I just save and refresh, we get 5, okay? There are 5 elements in this array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? So that's awesome. So basically, we know that heroes.length is 5. Now, if we were to log out heroes at index 0, that would be Superman. Index 1 would be Wonder Woman. Index 2, Batman. Index 3, Robin. Index 4 is Aquaman. So what we want to do is we want to start our counter variable at heroes.length minus 1, okay? So remember, heroes.length is equal to 5, okay? So if we do heroes.length minus 1, what do we get? We get 4, okay? So that will actually print out the last element in the array, Aquaman. So to prove that to you, let's do our for loop. So I'm going to say for, use the for keyword. I'm going to say let counter be equal to, and remember, we start our counter variable this time at the last element in the array. So I'm saying let counter be equal to heroes.length minus 1, okay? Now, we want to run our loop while our counter variable, if I said I there, I apologize, I meant to say counter, force a habit. But basically, we want to run our loop while our counter variable, well, counter, is greater than or equal to 0. And we want to include 0 because if we were to say, well, counter is greater than 0, we're not going to include Superman. We want to include him, okay? So counter is greater than or equal to 0. And after each loop iteration, every time we cycle through this array, we want to just take one of our counter variable by saying counter minus minus. So that's the decrement operator. And then all we need to do is just log out to the console, heroes at index counter. Okay? So let me just explain once again what's happening. We have our for loop. We've created our counter variable. We've said let counter be equal to heroes.length minus 1. Remember, there are 5 elements in the array, so heroes.length is 5. If you take 1 from it, heroes.length minus 1, we get 4. So if you log out to the console heroes at index 4, you're going to get Aquaman. Then we check our condition. We say is counter greater than or equal to 4? Is 4 greater than or equal to 0? Yes, it is. So we enter the loop. We just log out to the console heroes at index 4, which should be Aquaman. So to prove that to you, that this is going to work, we get Aquaman. Then what we do is, after we log out Aquaman, we come up here to the final expression in the for loop, and we decrement. We take 1 away. So now, counter has a value of 3. Heroes at index 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3. So therefore, we log out Robin. And we see that there, Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. And the great thing about this is that the code we've written is dynamic. So if we were to add another element to the array, forgive my attempt to spell cyborg, I believe that is how you spell it. What's going to happen now is we've added another element to the array, but we're still going to always include the last element of the array because we've written this dynamically. Okay, so now we get cyborg, Aquaman all the way down. Okay, so that's the great thing about this syntax. You know that if you want to print out the last element of the array, you can simply do array name dot length minus 1. Make sure your counter variable, you're testing while it's greater than or equal to 0. It's inclusive of 0 because remember arrays start counting at 0. So heroes at index 0 is Superman. And because we're counting backwards, you want to use the decrement operator rather than the increment operator. Otherwise you'll get stuck in an infinite loop. Okay, that's awesome. That's how you iterate over an array of strings backwards. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to a concept in JavaScript known as block scope, and essentially we're going to talk about global and local variables. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is create a global variable and we're going to create a local variable, and this will be important to understand when we start looking at functions in the next chapter. So essentially a global variable is a variable that is declared in the root of the document, and it is essentially accessible. We can access that variable anywhere within our document or our script file. So let me show you an example of this. If I say let hero name be equal to Superman, we've seen this before, okay? I've declared a variable called hero name. I've assigned a value of Superman. So right underneath that code, apologies, I can just log out that value of hero name, okay? So if I save and refresh, we get Superman. Now, because I've declared this variable inside of the root of the document, i.e. not in curly braces, not within a code block, so far we've seen code blocks such as, an if statement or loops, etc. We haven't got the functions yet. But essentially, it has been declared outside of curly braces, so it is in the root of the document. It is essentially a global variable. Okay, so this is a global variable. Okay. Now, if I was to come under here and create an if statement, okay, let's hard code it to be true, right? What I can do is I can console.log the value of hero name. Okay, so now what's going to happen is we're going to log out Superman twice without any errors, okay? And that is because we've declared and initialized the variable hero name with a value of Superman here, okay? And what we're doing is we're just logging that out to the console, okay? So we're just logging it out to the console. But because this is a global variable declared in the root of the document outside of curly braces such as here, we actually have access to that variable inside of this if statement. So really what this is, let me just kind of separate here. Okay, this is the global variable being logged to the console, okay? And here is the global variable being logged to the console from within the if statement. So within the if statement, we still have access to that variable, okay? So we just save and refresh. This is a global variable being logged to the console from the if statement, okay? So the key point here is that even though we've declared the variable in the root of the document, the global variable, we still have access to it both within the root of the document, i.e. outside of curly braces or a code block, and we still have access to it within the if statement. Okay? Awesome. Now, what was to happen if I was actually to create a variable inside of the if statement, okay? And then I try to access that later on in the document. Well, let's have a look, right? If I was to say, let hero name, this time we'll do it with Batman, be equal to Batman, okay? I've declared a variable called Batman, and I can log it out of the console, okay? Console.log hero name, okay? This should work for us, right? This will work. Now, this is actually, what we've done here is we've actually created a local variable. And the reason it is a local variable is because it has been declared or defined within a code block, i.e. between this curly brace and that curly brace. So what that means is we only have access to this variable within the code block. We don't have access to it outside of it. So I'll prove this to you. I've declared the variable here, let hero name be equal to Batman, on line 13. And on line 14, I just log it into the console. I say console.log hero name. So what's going to happen? We're just simply going to log out Batman. Okay? Now, watch what happens if I copy this code, okay, and paste it here. So it's the same code. I haven't made any mistakes. What's going to happen is we're actually going to get an error in the console. And that is because hero name has been declared locally within the curly braces. So it exists within the code block. We can access it within the code block, but we don't have access to it outside of the if statement because it has been declared locally. And that is the key difference between a global variable and a local variable. So to prove that to you, if I save and refresh, we get an uncaught reference error, hero name is not defined. And that's because while I've declared the variable here, you know, I've used the let keyword, let hero name be equal to Batman, it only exists locally. So it's a local variable, it exists locally within the curly braces. So I can access it within the curly braces, but outside I can't, because what's happening here is I'm trying to access a local variable globally within the document, okay? I know this is a bit confusing when you first see it, but we're going to learn more about global and local variables. We'll see them now in the next chapter when we get to functions. But the key takeaway is this. For now, just be aware that global and local variables exist. A global variable is one that is declared in the root of the document, i.e. outside of curly braces. So if I declare a global variable, I can still access it within, for example, you know, an if statement or a switch statement or loops, etc. Okay? However, if I declare a variable locally within a code block, i.e. between an opening and closing curly brace, such as in an if statement or whatever the case may be, we don't have access to that variable outside of that code block because it only exists locally. Okay? Can be a bit confusing. Just keep this in the back of your mind. Be very useful to understand when we start working with functions in chapter 3 of this course. So see you in the next tutorial. Okay, so we've now completed chapter 2 of this course, JavaScript for Beginners, where we've learned about control flow and decision making in JavaScript. So I'm not going to write any code in this tutorial. I just want to talk to you about the logic and questions you'll need to ask yourself when you're starting to write more advanced programs when you continue to get better with JavaScript. So essentially, what we've learned in this course, in terms so far in this chapter, in terms of if statements, switch statements, loops, etc., is we've really learned that if in JavaScript you need to make decisions, you can use, for example, an if statement. If a certain condition is true, run this piece of code, but if another condition is true, run that piece of code. And we've also learned that we can repeat code in JavaScript using a loop. So for example, we've previously seen if you want to log out numbers between, let's say, 1 and 100, or you could even do 1 and 200, you can do some sort of check to see if a number is an even or odd number using an if statement. Okay. We've also seen that we can repeat code. So for example, when we were checking if numbers were odd or even, we basically had to have some sort of counter variable and then run that code multiple times over and over to check every number between 1 and 100, okay? So basically this chapter was all about making decisions and control flow in JavaScript. So we know basically that if you want to make decisions, you can use the if statement, but if you want to repeat code, okay, you need to repeat some code, you can use loops. And we've seen, I believe, 3 different types of loops. I think we did for loops, while loops, and the do while loop. So we saw a number of different types of loops we can use. The next chapter of this course now, which we're moving on to, is going to be chapter 3, where we're going to be learning about functions in JavaScript, okay? So sometimes maybe you want to run a piece of code over and over again, and really what you want to do is you want to create a function, okay? So for example, say you needed to add 2 numbers together. You don't want to take a number, add it to a number, and then you've got your answer, and then do it again, writing out the code each time. You can actually create a function, a snippet of code, where you can call on that function to do the code for you, so it is reusable, okay? So one one challenge we're going to be doing in the next few chapters is we're going to be doing the FizzBuzz challenge, okay? I should have wrote that as a comment, my apologies. But basically, FizzBuzz is this idea that you basically write out the word fizz if one condition is true, you write out buzz if another condition is true, but if 2 conditions are true, you write out FizzBuzz. So that's an example of where we're going to have to be checking various numbers, i.e. repeating code, and making decisions using an if statement. Statement spelled incorrectly there. Apologies. Okay. So that was the chapter 2, control flow. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next chapter now. We're going to start talking about functions in JavaScript.